After just 9 days of calm, Gaza teeters on the edge of renewed conflict. The ceasefire, once hailed as a breakthrough, now faces collapse amid fresh violence and mutual accusations. This truce was meant to be a foundation for lasting peace, but its unraveling threatens to plunge millions back into chaos. The weekend's clashes reveal the deep mistrust that still divides Israelis and Palestinians. Understanding why this ceasefire is failing is crucial to grasping the immense challenges ahead. The world now asks, can this peace be saved, or is the region destined for another devastating war? The ceasefire began on October 10, 2025, after intense diplomacy led by President Trump. It was more than a pause in fighting. It launched a 20-point plan for Gaza's future, including prisoner exchanges and reconstruction. Israel released thousands of Palestinian prisoners and dropped controversial immigration plans, building initial trust. Yet, the agreement's ambitious terms demanded a level of trust that never truly existed. As deadlines approached, both sides began to interpret the terms differently, sowing new discord. The hope that followed the silence of the guns quickly faded as obstacles mounted. The path to peace, it turned out, was far more treacherous than anyone hoped. On October 19, what little peace Gaza had managed to hold on to was suddenly and violently shattered. For days there had been a fragile sense of hope, a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, the violence would subside. Families gathered around radios and televisions, clinging to news of the ceasefire, daring to imagine a return to normal life. But that hope was short-lived. In the early hours, Israeli airstrikes targeted Rafah and Beit Lahia, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the sky and shattering the silence that had settled over the city. The sudden roar of jets overhead and the thunder of explosions marked a devastating end to the brief calm. Explosions echoed through the densely populated neighborhoods of Gaza, lighting up the night sky and forcing families to scramble for shelter. The brief respite from violence was over, replaced once again by fear, confusion, and chaos. For many, the nightmare had returned in an instant. Initial reports from Gaza's civil defense painted a grim picture. At first, they claimed at least 13 people had been killed in the strikes, but as the hours passed and more rubble was searched, the death toll rose to 45. The true number remains uncertain, as chaos and destruction make it nearly impossible to account for everyone. The Israeli military stated that the strikes were in direct response to what they described as Hamas anti-tank missile attacks and gunfire near the border. According to their account, these attacks represented a clear violation of the ceasefire agreement, prompting what they called a necessary and immediate military response. At a press briefing, Israeli officials framed their actions as essential retaliation, placing the blame for the renewed violence squarely on Hamas. They insisted that the strikes were targeted and justified, a response to what they called a deliberate breach of the fragile truce. The government's message was clear. Responsibility for the escalation, in their view, lay with Hamas. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the human cost was immediate and devastating. Families mourned, loved ones lost in the strikes, and funerals were held for victims whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Investigations into civilian casualties are ongoing, but for those grieving, answers offer little comfort. The fog of war makes it difficult to know exactly what happened, and conflicting narratives only add to the confusion. But for the people of Gaza, the reality is painfully clear. The violence has returned, and with it, the fear and uncertainty that have become all too familiar. The war they thought was over has come back with a vengeance, bringing more death, more destruction, and a renewed sense of despair. For Gaza's residents, the hope of peace has once again slipped away, replaced by the harsh reality of survival in a conflict that seems never-ending. Israel's leaders quickly condemned Hamas, calling Sunday's events a flagrant ceasefire violation. Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered strong action, signaling zero tolerance for attacks from Gaza. Defense Minister Katz warned Hamas of escalating retaliation if violence continued. Israeli officials argue Hamas's armed displays and refusal to disarm show bad faith. Delays in returning the bodies of Israeli hostages have further inflamed tensions. For Israel, these actions justify a firm, reactive security posture. In the wake of renewed violence, Hamas has firmly denied Israel's accusations, stating unequivocally that it did not attack IDF troops or violate the terms of the fragile truce. The group's spokespersons have appeared before international media, reiterating their commitment to the ceasefire and dismissing Israeli claims as baseless. According to Hamas, these allegations are not only unfounded, but are part of a broader strategy to undermine the truce and justify further military action. They argue that Israel is seeking any excuse to resume its offensive, and that the accusations serve as a convenient pretext for renewed hostilities. Hamas officials have gone on record, both locally and internationally, to claim that Israel is fabricating incidents and manipulating facts to create a narrative that supports its military objectives. They assert that the Israeli government is under pressure to show strength and is therefore looking for justification to break the ceasefire. In press conferences and interviews, Hamas leaders have called on the international community to scrutinize Israel's claims and to recognize what they describe as a pattern of pretextual accusations. Through various media channels, Hamas has sought to highlight the suffering of Gaza's civilian population, emphasizing the toll that renewed conflict would take on ordinary people. By showcasing images of injured civilians, destroyed homes, and grieving families, they aim to rally both local and international support, casting Israel as the aggressor and themselves as defenders of the Palestinian people. This media strategy is designed to shift global opinion and put pressure on Israel to halt its military operations. Senior Hamas leader Mohammed Nazal has taken a prominent role in these efforts, making it clear that disarmament is not an option for the group. However, he has also indicated a willingness to consider a long-term truce as a possible compromise, suggesting that Hamas is open to negotiations if its core demands are respected. Nazal's statements are intended to present Hamas as both resolute and reasonable, seeking peace but unwilling to surrender its means of self-defense. Hamas frames its refusal to disarm not as a rejection of peace, but as a necessary act of self-defense in the face of ongoing threats. Leaders argue that giving up their weapons would leave Gaza vulnerable to future attacks and undermine their ability to protect their people. They insist that any lasting peace must address the root causes of the conflict and guarantee security for Palestinians. Regarding the recent events in Rafah, Hamas maintains that its fighters were not engaged in hostilities against Israeli forces, but were instead involved in a local dispute unrelated to the ceasefire. They claim that the incident was misrepresented by Israel, and that no truce violations occurred on their part. This narrative is intended to counter Israeli reports and to reassure both their supporters and the international community of their commitment to the ceasefire. Eyewitnesses in Rafah have provided their own accounts, with some describing clashes involving a criminal gang rather than the IDF. These testimonies have been highlighted by Hamas to further challenge the Israeli version of events. The group argues that such confusion is often exploited by Israel to justify military escalation and calls for independent investigations into the incidents. Ultimately, Hamas contends that Israel either misread the situation or deliberately used it as a pretext to launch new attacks. They urge the international community to look beyond official statements and to question the motives behind renewed violence, warning that without accountability, the cycle of accusation and conflict will only continue. The collapse of the ceasefire is rooted in a web of broken promises, deep-seated mistrust, and the weight of history between the two sides. What began as a fragile hope for peace quickly unraveled, exposing the underlying tensions that have long defined the conflict. Israel, for its part, insists it has honored its commitments under the agreement, releasing dozens of Palestinian prisoners and shelving controversial emigration plans. Yet, Israeli officials have repeatedly accused Hamas of failing to uphold their end of the bargain, particularly when it comes to the return of hostages and their remains. The issue of hostages has become a lightning rod for public anger and political pressure, with families of the missing staging protests and demanding answers. So far, only 12 out of 28 bodies have been returned to Israel. Hamas claims that ongoing fighting and logistical hurdles have made further transfers impossible, but Israeli officials dismiss these explanations as little more than stalling tactics. For the families waiting for closure, each day without news is another day of anguish and uncertainty. At the heart of the deadlock is the issue of disarmament. Israel demands that Hamas lay down its weapons as a precondition for any lasting peace, viewing continued armed resistance as a sign of bad faith. Hamas, however, refuses to disarm, arguing that its weapons are essential for the defense of its people and territory, especially in the face of ongoing military threats. In an attempt to break the impasse, Hamas has offered a long-term truce, but without agreeing to disarm. Israel, seeing this as an incomplete gesture, has rejected the proposal, insisting that true peace cannot be achieved while one side remains armed and ready for conflict. The result is a bitter stalemate, with each side accusing the other of exploiting the ceasefire for tactical advantage. Israeli leaders claim Hamas is using the pause to regroup and rearm, while Hamas alleges that Israel is leveraging negotiations to gain international support and weaken Palestinian resolve. As trust erodes and violence flares anew, ordinary people on both sides bear the brunt of the renewed hostilities. The deadlock over hostages and weapons has not only shattered hopes for peace, but has also deepened the wounds of a conflict that seems without end. What was once a symbol of hope, the ceasefire agreement, now lies in tatters, a stark reminder of broken promises and the immense challenges that still stand in the way of lasting peace. For Gaza's 2 million residents, the ceasefire was a rare chance to breathe. Markets reopened, children played, and families began to rebuild. The return of violence shattered this fragile normalcy, plunging people back into fear. Parents struggle to comfort children as explosions resume. Daily life is once again dangerous. Humanitarian aid and repairs, just beginning, are now at risk of disruption. Most Gazans rely on aid. Any interruption can be life-threatening. The renewed conflict extinguishes hope for a better future, especially for Gaza's youth. The true cost of war is measured not just in casualties, but in stolen futures. With the ceasefire on the brink, Gaza faces grim possibilities. A total collapse could trigger all-out war, with catastrophic consequences for civilians. Alternatively, a simmering conflict could persist. No peace, just ongoing tension and sporadic violence. International actors, especially the U.S., play a crucial role in preventing escalation. Diplomatic pressure and mediation are essential to salvage any hope for peace. The best-case scenario, a renewed commitment to the truce, requires compromise and political will that are currently lacking. Only sustained international engagement can steer the region away from disaster. The past 48 hours have brought Gaza and Israel to the edge of renewed war. Accusations, casualties, and hardened rhetoric have replaced the brief calm. The core disputes, hostages, disarmament, and broken promises have erupted into open conflict. Without credible mediation, any truce will be short-lived. Immediate de-escalation and transparent cooperation are urgently needed. The international community must intensify diplomatic efforts to restore calm and prevent further tragedy. The path to peace is narrow, but for the sake of millions, it must be pursued.